What if I told you that the light you carry might be the very thing blinding you? As strange as it sounds, this idea echoes in countless souls walking through life, believing that the brighter they shine, the safer they'll be. But it's not always like that. Sometimes the very light we work so hard to cultivate becomes so intense that it begins to overwhelm us from within, confusing our steps, distorting our senses, quietly dimming the flame that was meant to guide us. When did your own light stop illuminating your path and start confusing your direction? There's a fine line between spiritual clarity and spiritual exhaustion, and many of us cross it without noticing, trying to be too much, give too much, endure too much. Too much light becomes heavy, too much responsibility suffocates, too much expectation drains. Even what begins as something good, a genuine desire to help, inspire, guide, or set an example, can slowly turn into a burden that wears away your essence. Some people lose themselves trying to be light for everyone else. They reach out, give strength, offer warmth, yet in the silence of their own soul, they fade. The outward glow grows, but the inner flame weakens, and when they finally realize they're tired, they no longer know how to find their way back to their center. Jesus Christ understood this human dilemma deeply. He spoke of the light of the world, of the path, of the truth that sets us free. But he also understood the weight of expectations, the noise of the crowds, and the invisible demands that wear down those who try to carry the brightness of purpose alone. He saw not only the light within each person, he also saw the shadows that same light could cast. And it is in this intersection between clarity and blindness that many souls get lost, believing they're moving forward when, in truth, they're simply hurting themselves with their own glow. Biblical metaphors echo this truth. The light that shows the way can also reveal spiritual blindness. The scorching sun in the desert can guide you or deceive you. Clear vision can become distorted when you lack rest, humility, and divine direction. The problem isn't the light, it's trying to carry it alone, as if the heart could sustain it without rest, without guidance, without divine alignment. And here is where a mystery begins to unfold. There is a story of a traveler who wandered too far, following a light he believed was his own. And there are three revealed words, three words capable of transforming the journey of anyone who ever got lost inside their own brightness. These words aren't magic formulas or rigid theological concepts. They are spiritual keys, simple and profound, able to realign a weary soul with the purpose it once forgot. But before these words are revealed, you must understand what truly happens when someone gets lost inside their own light, because deep down, maybe you're also carrying a brightness you were never meant to carry alone. There was once a traveler who walked with firm steps and a burning heart. He believed wholeheartedly in his mission, to be someone who would illuminate paths, open doors, and achieve great things. His eyes carried the glow of spiritual ambition, and his chest held the conviction that the light he radiated was enough to guide him through any desert. He wanted to be seen, recognized, admired, not out of vanity, but from a longing to prove to himself that he was worthy of the journey he had chosen. And so he walked, enamored with his own light, unaware that he was slowly distancing himself from the true source of it. Around him stretched a golden desert, where the sand reflected the intense brilliance of an almost eternal sun. From afar, everything seemed bright, promising, nearly sacred, but the farther he went, the more the light began to confuse him. Instead of clarity, the brightness blurred the horizon, making it difficult to distinguish what was path, what was mirage, what was promise, and what was illusion. This was the paradox of light. When it becomes too strong, the details disappear. The traveler saw everything except what truly mattered. He began to ignore subtle signs along the way, the emotional exhaustion silently piling up. The quiet whisper of pride telling him he didn't need help, that he could continue alone. The gradual loss of spiritual humility, the very humility Jesus often taught, emphasizing dependence on the Father rather than human strength. But the traveler didn't notice. He believed moving forward was always the right choice, and stopping meant weakness. He confused perseverance with stubbornness, light with silent vanity, mission with self-punishment. Jesus taught that true greatness lies in humility, in recognizing limits and allowing oneself to be guided. But the traveler, enamored with the idea of being the light, began carrying a burden that was never his. While trying to illuminate everything and everyone, he forgot to illuminate his own interior, and so he continued walking, unaware that with each step, a circle was forming around him. Here comes the first spiritual plot twist. The traveler believed he was walking toward his dream, but in reality, he was walking in circles. The vastness of the desert made it seem like he was making progress, but he always returned to the same point. Trapped in an invisible cycle, it was as if the external light, so intense, had extinguished the internal compass meant to guide him. After walking for so long, his body could no longer respond with the same strength, and his heart felt weighted down as if carrying centuries of expectations. In a moment of emotional collapse, he fell to his knees in the hot sand, feeling the weight of a battle that no longer made sense. The desert fell silent, and for the first time, the inner shadow he had ignored emerged. It wasn't a dark, evil presence, just a shadow whispering, "You're tired of trying to be what you were never meant to sustain alone." He closed his eyes, not in despair, but in surrender to the silence. Then a gentle voice, like a cool breeze cutting through the heat of the desert, touched his heart. A divine voice, a metaphor for the loving presence of Jesus, who always appears when the soul finally admits its exhaustion. The voice said, "You didn't get lost in darkness, you got lost in the light you tried to carry alone." That sentence shattered something inside him, a layer of pride, an ancient weight, an illusion of self-sufficiency. This revelation sparked a new understanding. Light without purpose doesn't guide, it confuses. Light born from ego demands more than it gives. Light carried alone becomes self-pressure, pride, and spiritual disorientation. The traveler realized it wasn't God's light that was tiring him. It was the artificial glow he tried to produce on his own, as if it were his responsibility to illuminate everything. As he lay there in the sand, he sensed something about to be revealed. 3 words, 3 directions, 3 spiritual anchors that would completely transform his journey. The voice, preparing his heart to receive them, spoke not as instruction, but as a gift, offered only when the soul is finally ready. The story was only beginning, and the 3 words that would soon emerge could restore not only the traveler, but anyone who ever got lost inside their own light. When the traveler slowly opened his eyes, he noticed the desert had not changed. The sun was still high, the sand still hot, the brightness still intense. But something inside him had shifted, a kind of luminous quiet, as if his soul had finally found a place to breathe. The voice that had called him was still there, not as an external sound, but as a presence gently weaving through his thoughts. He knew he was about to receive something important, something that would not appear as theory, but as a key capable of unlocking inner doors he had sealed long ago. The 3 words emerged not as commands, but as spiritual whispers: restore, surrender, return. Simple words, yet powerful enough to feel like they had traveled through time, scripture, emotional breakdowns, and old hopes. They weren't rigid theological ideas. They were movements of the soul, inner pathways Jesus invited his followers to walk even when they lacked the strength to understand everything at once. For someone lost inside their own light, the first step isn't doing more, it's making space to be rebuilt. The first word resounded within him like a warm, healing breath. Restore. It carried no pressure, only promise. What does spiritual restoration mean? It's not simply going back to who you were before you broke. It's allowing God to rebuild what time, pride, haste, and exhaustion have damaged. Jesus was always a restorer of identity. He touched the blind and restored their sight, touched the outcast and restored their place, touched the weary and restored their hope. To restore is to return the true spark, not a glow powered by human effort, but the original flame tied to the divine essence. The traveler began to see that restoration required honesty about his cracks. For so long, he tried to appear strong, unshakable, too illuminated to admit weakness. But now, in the heat of the desert, he understood. True light doesn't arise from perfection, only from sincerity. Jesus saw beauty in brokenness because he knew that broken places leave room for new formation. He imagined himself like a shattered vessel restored by loving hands, not returning to its old form, but becoming something more precious. Just as metal is refined by fire, the soul grows not by avoiding pain, but by moving through it with purpose. Then came an emotional twist. Restoration wasn't calling him back to who he once was. It was calling him toward who he was meant to become. Restoration isn't a return to the past. It's the unveiling of a stronger future. His soul wasn't being rebuilt to repeat, but to move forward. And as that truth settled in, something within him loosened, a knot dissolving after years of tension. The second word arrived like a sudden wind, fresh, unexpected: surrender. At first, he resisted. The word seemed at odds with everything he had stood for: effort, determination, personal strength. Surrender? It felt like giving up. But the gentle voice softened the misunderstanding. Jesus often spoke of surrender, always with tenderness. My yoke is easy. He said this to remind us that we were never meant to carry the full weight of our light, our responsibilities, our pain, or our expectations alone. His surrender isn't weakness, it's freedom. The traveler realized he had been gripping ropes far too heavy, believing it was his job to hold everything together. A vivid image appeared, a hand gripping a rope until it bleeds, believing that to let go is to lose control. But the pain wasn't caused by falling, it came from holding on too tightly. Surrender means recognizing we don't have to save ourselves. It means trusting in a greater light, a greater wisdom, a greater love to carry what we cannot. True spiritual surrender takes courage. It means admitting the soul is too tired to keep holding what it was never meant to carry. Jesus doesn't demand constant strength. He offers rest, and when the traveler embraced this truth, the weight he had carried for years began to dissolve like sand, slipping through open fingers. Then came the third word, so deep it felt rooted in the human heart itself: return. At first, he thought it meant going back, but quickly realized that wasn't the invitation. Return doesn't mean retracing old steps. It means returning to the essential, to yourself, to what makes your soul breathe, to the inner quiet where divine light reveals itself without noise. Jesus often called people back, not to their past, but to their center, to their truest identity, to the connection with God that never truly breaks, only gets buried beneath layers of pressure and illusion. Returning means stepping back into the inner home that always had space for you, opening a door that was never locked, just forgotten. It means realizing that even after detours, falls, and confusion, there's still a sacred place within you waiting to be inhabited again. And then came the final twist. Returning isn't moving backward. It's moving forward with awareness. It's reclaiming your axis, aligning your heart with what is real. It's walking the path again, not because it's easy, but because it's illuminated by the right light. The three words began to weave themselves naturally into his being. Restore healed his inner fractures. Surrender lifted the impossible weight from his shoulders. Return realigned him with truth. He absorbed these words like someone drinking water after days in the desert. They weren't instructions, but revelations, invitations, pathways condensed into 3 gentle breaths. When he finally rose from the sand, he wasn't transformed by a magical solution. He was transformed by a new way of existing. His light no longer needed to be intense, just true. It didn't need to illuminate everything, just enough for the next step. He didn't need to run anymore. He simply needed to walk alongside the one guiding him. And so the desert hadn't changed, but he had, and because he changed, everything around him began to take on new meaning. As the traveler continued his journey, something within him walked too, something that had long been buried, muffled, silenced. For the first time, he wasn't running from his own shadow. In the past, he believed his shadow was an enemy, a flaw, a sign of spiritual weakness. But now, softened by the 3 revealed words, he began to see that part of himself differently. The shadow wasn't evil. It was simply the part of his soul that never received enough care because he had been too busy trying to shine for everyone else. Jesus was always a master at illuminating shadows without condemning them. When he walked among the wounded, the ashamed, the fearful, he didn't offer judgment, he offered presence. His light didn't expose to humiliate, his light exposed to free. And in the desert, the traveler experienced something similar. The light now growing within him wasn't harsh or demanding. It didn't blind him with expectations. It was gentle, steady, almost nurturing. A light that whispered, "Let's look at this together. You don't have to be afraid." As he walked, the shadow revealed forgotten pieces of his story, his perfectionism, his unrealistic expectations, the masks he had worn to appear strong when he was merely trying to survive, the silent fears of disappointing others, of not being enough, of failing those who believed in him. The shadow showed these not to wound him, but to help him rest from them. True light doesn't harm, it reveals, and in revealing, it allows the soul to breathe without armor. With each internal revelation, the traveler felt lighter, as if every step loosened a grain of sand he had carried for years. His growing spiritual clarity wasn't tied to effort, but to release. He finally understood that the light he tried to produce on his own had become a quiet prison. But the divine light guiding him now did not demand perfection or performance. It simply led. At one point, he stopped walking and looked at his shadow stretched across the sand, long, soft under the now golden light. And a profound realization rose within him. He wasn't lost. He was tired. For years, he had mistaken spiritual exhaustion for a lack of direction. He believed he was failing, when in truth he had been overburdened. The light he tried to carry alone had consumed more than it illuminated. The gentle voice returned, familiar now. "When your strength ends, mine begins." He felt this phrase like an embrace across his chest. There was no blame, only comfort. Jesus wasn't telling him he'd done everything wrong, only that he never needed to do it alone. And that was enough to heal a fatigue he had never dared admit. He closed his eyes and allowed the shadow to blend with the light. He realized he didn't need to reject any part of himself to be worthy of the journey. The shadow represented his limits, his wounds, his humanity, all of which were doors to deeper spirituality. Divine light doesn't replace humanity, it completes it. And then came the reflection meant not just for him, but for anyone who's ever felt the same. Are you truly lost, or just tired from carrying a light that was never meant to be carried alone? If you've come this far, let this moment be more than listening. Let it be a mirror. There is an inner calling that gently reaches those who lost themselves, trying to be too strong, too bright, too present. A calling that doesn't shout but whispers. It says, pause, breathe, listen. Don't carry alone what heaven never asked you to carry. The three words, restore, surrender, return, are not just spiritual reminders, they are directions for the weary heart. Jesus offers them not as demands, but as a compass guiding the soul back to what matters most. In a world saturated with pressure, productivity, and overwhelming expectations, losing yourself in your own light is more common than you think. We try to be enough for everything, and forget to be gentle with ourselves. Modern life creates an artificial brightness that demands too much, constant comparison, fear of failure, the feeling of never doing enough. All of it weighs more than we admit. And in the midst of this quiet avalanche, we convince ourselves that being light means never stopping, never resting, never asking for help. But spiritual truth is different. The light meant for you does not need to destroy you. True light guides softly. It does not demand human sacrifice. It offers rest. Jesus doesn't call you to be an unshakable beacon. He calls you to be loved, to breathe, to be guided, to allow His light to embrace what you can no longer carry. So before taking your next step, let yourself hear this inner calling. Maybe you're not lost. Maybe you just need to rest for a moment in the gaze of Jesus. When the traveler resumed his journey after integrating the three words into his heart, the desert no longer felt the same. The sun still shone, but now its light had a softness he couldn't perceive before. It was as if the world was breathing with him, every grain of sand, every whisper of wind, every shadow stretching across the ground. He walked toward the sunset, where the light didn't sting or overwhelm. It simply embraced the horizon with a sacred gold. There was no rush in his steps, only purpose. This new light guiding him didn't consume, it led. It was balanced, the light of true spirituality, not born from ego, but from humility. The traveler finally understood that the glow he once tried to generate on his own was heavy because it came from a need to prove his worth. But the light now guiding him came from Jesus, steady, gentle, and free of pressure. He realized he was never meant to carry the light as a burden, but to follow it as a path. Reflections bloomed naturally within him as he walked. Balanced light doesn't demand perfection, only honesty. It doesn't require relentless effort, just daily surrender. It doesn't place the weight of the world on your shoulders. It offers rest so you can walk again. Every step seemed to whisper, you don't have to rush anymore. You just have to be present. And that presence reconnected him to the purpose he had lost beneath expectations and responsibilities. Jesus, now not just a voice, but a silent guide, walked beside him, understanding the human soul in every detail. The divine light didn't illuminate miles ahead, only the next step, and that was freeing. With divine light, the path becomes possible. Spirituality shifts from pressure to peace, fear diminishes, confusion lifts. The soul realigns with what truly matters. The three words, restore, surrender, return, became daily practices. Restore, acknowledging when the soul needs rebuilding. Surrender, releasing the control you never had. Return, coming back to your center, your quiet, your essence. These weren't isolated steps, but a continuous cycle, a spiritual rhythm keeping the heart awake and light. As he walked, something within him began glowing effortlessly. Not a blazing lighthouse, but a steady flame, resilient to the wind. A light that didn't consume, but guided. And with that inner transformation, he sensed the story nearing its symbolic conclusion, not the end of his journey, but the beginning of a new way of walking. Taking a deep breath, he prepared for the final revelation, one meant not only for his story, but for anyone who has ever lost themselves within their own light. And so, as the traveler watched the sunset soften the boundaries of the desert, his inner journey took on a meaning it never had before. He no longer walked to prove anything, nor to chase a consuming goal. He walked because, for the first time, he understood that true light doesn't come from the outside in. It rises from within when the heart opens to divine presence. His story wasn't about failure, nor heroic triumph. It was about awakening, about realizing that even when we think we're lost, an invisible thread is guiding every step, every pause, every fall, and every new beginning. The traveler's journey, with its quiet wounds and deep revelations, now becomes a mirror for you, because in some way, all of us have walked too far chasing a light that confused more than it guided. We've all gripped ropes that wounded us, trying to hold everything together. We've all mistaken exhaustion for failure and pride for strength, and we've all forgotten that light is not a human responsibility, it's a divine gift. When you look back, you'll notice how often you tried to be the light for others while dimming within. And when you look inward, you'll see how often you pushed yourself until peace slipped away, believing you had to sustain everything alone. The traveler's story shows there is a gentler, truer path, the path where Jesus doesn't ask you to shine through force, but to let his light shine through you. A path where the three words, restore, surrender, return, become silent beacons capable of realigning even the most exhausted soul. Now, the loop closes. At the beginning, the question echoed like a philosophical whisper. When did your own light stop illuminating your path and start confusing your steps? And now, at the end, a new question arises, not to confuse, but to reveal. And where, exactly, has your light brought you in this moment? This question doesn't ask for quick answers. It asks for courage, honesty, stillness. It asks you to observe yourself with tenderness, without judgment, allowing truth to emerge with the same gentleness God uses to meet those he encounters along the way. There is one last question, perhaps the most powerful of all, capable of shifting not only your day, but the way you walk from here on out. If Jesus were to reveal today the three words your soul most needs to hear, would you have the courage to apply them? Questions like this don't require haste, they require depth, not perfect answers, just sincerity. And as you let this question rest in your chest, receive this final message. You are not alone. There is a light that doesn't weigh you down, doesn't wound, doesn't blind, a light that embraces, guides, and transforms. Keep walking with it. Keep returning to what's essential. And if this message touched your heart, know that here you will always find words that restore, guide, and gather, offered not for marketing, but for care, purpose, and love. May your inner light, now balanced, always be the path, never the burden.